You're listening to the Shared Security Podcast with Tom Eston and Scott Wright, exploring the trust you put in people, apps, and technology.
Hosted by Scott Wright, the Streetwise Security Coach, and Tom Eston, penetration tester and ethical hacker. And sponsored by Security Perspectives, your source for tailored security awareness training and assessment solutions. We bring you stories, advice, and tips to help you make better risk decisions because nobody else can make them for you.
Episode 53. Microsoft grounds its teenage artificially intelligent daughter for making inappropriate tweets.
Hello and welcome to the Shared Security Podcast for, what day is it today, Tom?
It is May 4th.
May 4th, 2016. Yep, and we are on episode 53. I'm Scott Wright, the Streetwise Security Coach, here with Tom Eston. And it's been a while. I've almost forgotten what Tom looks like, although I don't really see him usually anyway, but miles apart.
Yes.
So, I guess with the gap in our podcast series, we've got a little bit of catching up to do. So we're going to cover a couple of stories that might have happened a little while ago, but I think we've got some good things to talk about.
Absolutely. There's never a dull moment on this show.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, we got some good feedback. I think lately we've been getting lots of likes on our Facebook page. And I have one question for our audience too. It's like when I look at our Facebook page and I get the stats on it, it shows like an unreasonable number of unlikes. And I'm just wondering, like, do people actually explicitly unlike our page, or is there something else happening? Because at times, if you look at the last week's activity, it's like you had 3 likes and 3 unlikes, and I don't really know how to interpret that. So if anybody understands the stats on these Facebook pages, please let us know.
It could be more of a Facebook thing because a lot of the data I don't quite understand either. Let's just blame Facebook.
Yeah. We've blamed them enough for just about everything else. Why not?
That's right.
And while we're talking about it, why don't we tell people we have a Facebook page?
Yes, we do. So you can search for us or go to sharedsecurity.net and you can get the link there. But we are on Facebook.
Okay, yeah. And we basically share stories of things we find on there, and people get a chance to follow us while we're between episodes.
And you can comment and share with your friends, of course.
Yeah, and we appreciate that when you do that.
Yeah.
Cool. And we're on Twitter too. Shared Sec, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so we'll tweet stuff from time to time as well. So that said, why don't we look at our agenda for today?
Yes, let's do that. We're going to start off talking about VPNs. We've had a few of our listeners ask for our opinions about VPNs. We'll talk about some of the use cases, why you would even want to use a VPN outside of work. I mean, most of us that work in the technology field, or even if you're working for pretty much any corporation these days, they usually give you some type of VPN access to connect to the business network and your files and things like that. But we'll talk a little bit more just about why a regular consumer, a regular user might want to use a VPN.
Yep, and if you're not familiar with what the term means, it stands for virtual private network, and just so that we're not turning you off already, but the virtual private network should tell you something. We're talking about security, so There are definitely some security aspects of this stuff that you will want to know about.
Yep. Exactly. And then we'll talk about a vulnerability in a pretty popular little piece of hardware called an EasyCast. And there's some security researchers that have discovered a vulnerability in this particular device. Again, talking about the Internet of Things and just more of these types of issues, just kind of spreading awareness about some of the risks that are inherent in some of these devices.
Yes, and there's several different types of these things. They're almost like a set-top box, but they can plug right into your TV and make it smart.
Exactly. And then we'll talk about some new technology that's starting to come out that helps protect some of these Internet of Things devices. This is one called a company called Barracuda, and they have a firewall that does some interesting things. So we'll touch a little bit on that.
Yeah, I'm really interested to hear what we can learn about how they're protecting the Internet of Things.
Exactly.
And yeah,
And we'll talk about one of my favorite topics, Microsoft's now I'd say infamous Twitter account that became a robot in about 24 hours, started spewing all kinds of nasty things out on the internet, and we'll talk about some AI gone bad.
and actually, it was they set it up as a teen girl's persona, right? So it
Right.
kind of made it all that much more interesting.
What could possibly go wrong?
Yep. And actually, I've got an article to talk about regarding the Google Nest purchase of Revolve, which was a device that came out a few years ago. But they got purchased by Google Nest, and something funny is happening to all the devices that people bought from Revolve. So we're going to talk about that. Yeah. All right.
Very nice.
So I guess let's start on the discussion of VPNs, virtual private networks. Where shall we start?
Let's talk about what a VPN is and
Mhm.
maybe talk about some of the use cases. Why would you want to use a VPN?
Right. So a virtual private network really is a way of isolating everything that you do from the rest of the internet in some way or other, right?
That's right.
And how do they do that?
It protects your data as it proceeds over the internet, right?
Mhm.
So there's something called clear text transmission. So there's a common attack that hackers use to intercept that transmission of information. And there's lots of tools and techniques to do that. But essentially, if you're not using some form of encryption, and even if you are, it's pretty trivial these days to intercept that information. And of course, as we've talked about on the show before, there's lots of things that attackers and hackers will use that information and try to do bad things to you or bad things to your company. And so that's really one of the points of why you would want to use a VPN.
Yeah, and if we go back like a couple of decades, right, when the internet first arrived, we didn't have a concept of wireless devices really at all, and all of everybody's internet access typically would go through a telephone company or service provider through their routers, right? And nobody ever expected that anybody other than those trusted parties would really have access to the data as it was traveling over networks. And over time, we discovered ways that people were injecting themselves in between you and the person you're communicating with, and we call that a man-in-the-middle attack, right?
Right. Exactly.
And so when you become a man in the middle, you have a lot of power over what can happen on the data traveling back and forth.
Yes, you have direct control over, so say you're interacting with your bank, and if there is a man in the middle attack going on, you could be sending, a transfer of money from, say, one account to another. The attacker could intercept that transmission and change the amount of money to something else or redirect it to another account. And then from your perspective, everything would look, completely normal, like you're doing, regular business and a regular transaction.
Mm-hmm. And I guess we'll talk about use cases, but the one by far the most popular, I believe, right now is the free Wi-Fi hotspot model, right? Where you go into a Starbucks and you connect, and instantly you can do your web surfing. But there are potentially people around you who can also sniff the data that you're sending and receiving over that hotspot, right?
That's correct. And one of the big misconceptions about just that kind of use case is, oftentimes I'll have people say, "Well, I'm using HTTPS, right? I'm going over SSL, so doesn't that protect me? And how could someone intercept an encrypted transmission?" And my answer back to them is usually attackers can still intercept that. Usually through sending you basically a fake SSL certificate for you to accept, thereby what happens is they will then decrypt the information on their machine and then re-encrypt it as it goes back out to the server. So you can still, from even using HTTPS, that doesn't stop an attack like this. And that's where a VPN really comes into play.
Yeah, and for example, I've noticed this many times trying to connect on a free Wi-Fi hotspot. A lot of times there are special kinds of proxies that are software that sits there and mediates, your connection through that legitimate hotspot. But it may actually try to, at some point or other, impersonate the site you're going to in order to authenticate you or just get you to go to their own site so you can accept their terms and conditions, right? It's a redirect. And any attacker could essentially do that as well by grabbing something that you've requested and returning a request back to you before the original site does. And all of a sudden, you would be directed through their hotspot. And as you said, they could send you a fake SSL certificate, which to me would be hardly noticeable because many sites I try to connect to legitimately or at the hotspots always or often do try to send me a certificate anyway, right? Legitimately, which confuses the heck out of people, I think.
That's right. That's right. So yeah, whenever you see those pop-ups saying, this site's certificate isn't correct or it's expired or something like that, most people just click OK and continue on with their day, not thinking of maybe some of the security ramifications of doing that. So we've become kind of click happy with all the pop-ups and the windows and everything else that we get on our computers. So that's what makes that attack pretty easy to carry out.
And all this to say, what we really want is a way to get through that hotspot to the place we want to go or to some other trusted place from which we could go to the places we want to go. So that's essentially what a VPN will do for us. It will provide strong authentication of the site that we're planning to connect to and also encrypt or scramble all the data going back and forth.
That's right. And it makes it very difficult to intercept the VPN transmission because of the way that you authenticate and you set that connection up, essentially.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of employers provide VPN for their employees. So that's probably where many of our listeners have heard it before. If they are traveling employees, for example, or they're allowed to work out of their office, they might actually be required to use a VPN in order to connect to their corporate network remotely. So they would have to run some software from their computer and authenticate, and then they would have a connection that goes actually through their employer sometimes, and then out to the internet.
That's right. Yep. So it's pretty common in the business world, and in fact, I'd say if a business doesn't have a VPN, you're probably a really small business, and maybe you don't have remote employees or the business need for it. But it is very, very common in the business world.
Mm-hmm. And so then that brings us to the personal world. Maybe you'd like the same kind of protection that your employer is providing, or maybe your spouse's employer, because for the same reasons you don't want people to be sniffing your data. So you can acquire private VPNs or commercial VPNs for personal use, and many of them are free, right?
Yep, that's right. There's a few free products out there that you can use. There's also VPNs that you can set up on your own. So if you're a little bit technical savvy, you can. There's tons of directions on the internet of how to create your own VPN at home. So for example, if you're out at a hotel or you're on vacation and you're concerned about your security of what you're doing on the internet, you can create yourself a VPN that what it does is it connects into your home network and protects basically everything that you're sending from wherever you're at to your home network, and then it goes out from that connection. So you're essentially protecting what you're doing with that current connection.
Yep, but there are a lot of people, I'm sure, who don't really have the technical skills or the time to try and configure one of these, and I'm one of them. So I actually use a commercial personal VPN myself for my own business, and so the one that I use, I'm not saying it's the best one, but it's ProXPN, PROXPN. And I've used it for a couple of years now, and I'm pretty happy with it. It does have a free version, so there are limitations on the free version to some extent, which is how they managed to pay for providing the service. You have some premium options, which are one of the things I guess we should explain about VPN. If it's commercial, you can typically have more than one point of presence or exit node, basically. So if you set up your own VPN to your own home, then when you connect, you're always connecting to your home and then going to the internet from there. But if some of the commercial ones, when you pay for it, you actually have access to multiple different exit nodes around the world. You can come out in Seattle or Dallas or Netherlands or Singapore or whatever you'd like. And that brings us to another topic around being able to use content that's been published or licensed only for certain geographical areas. So a lot of people use VPNs to make it look like they're living in the United States or other countries in order to be able to consume online content from those locations.
Yep, exactly. We're seeing more of that recently.
Yeah, and I'm a case study because in Canada we use Netflix, but we have about half the catalog, access to about half the catalog of Netflix devices or Netflix shows that you do in the U.S. And so it's been a very popular thing for Canadians to have a proxy-based VPN, which is a slightly different thing. It doesn't necessarily encrypt all the data, but what it does is it makes use of the fact that because of certain network parameters as the packets travel around the internet, they can be tagged so that they look like they are coming from a specific server, and then they know that that server is in the States, so it looks like you're in the States. So that said, a lot of people had been using that, but Netflix has actually cracked down on people using proxy-based VPNs to access U.S. content. So there's a downside sometimes, or a little bit of a risk when you're using them. It complicates things a little bit for people, but in general, it's a good thing to have everything authenticated and encrypted from end to end.
Exactly. So we'll put a couple links in the show notes on, some popular, free VPN services, as well as some of the commercial ones, and then you can explore a little bit further if you're interested in that.
Yeah. So let us know if you still have questions that you'd like us to answer in that area. We'd be happy to cover it again in a future episode.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right, so let's move on to the EasyCast, which to me it looks a lot like a Chromecast. Is that right?
It does look like a Chromecast, but I don't believe it is a Google device. I think it may be a knockoff, but I think it's more. Instead of if you're familiar with how the Chromecast works, you can stream Netflix and all the those types of services over it. This one allows you to share your screen. So, similar to an Apple TV or a Chromecast, you can share whatever you have on your phone with your TV. You can stream music, videos, pictures. You can surf the internet from it. And there's some other options, but you basically plug it into the HDMI port of your TV, and that's how it's installed.
I thought the Chromecast one actually plugs into your USB port, doesn't it, on the TV?
That also plugs into an HDMI.
Oh, does
as
it?
well,
Okay.
On your TV. Yep.
I've never used one. So, but in general, yeah, we're talking about devices that you can communicate with that are plugged right into your TV.
Yep. And, and we'll put a link in the show notes, but this is just another example of there were just a ton of vulnerabilities found in this device. Everything from the Wi-Fi connection all the way to, some pretty serious vulnerabilities found within the firmware itself that would definitely be classified as pretty serious.
Yeah, something I noticed was really interesting, and I think it's actually going to be a wider problem among new products, right? And that is when a device has its own web server for administration, that could lead to a lot of vulnerabilities, right? If somebody's nearby and able to access it, then if they're able to, as in this case of this one, the researchers were able to actually upload malicious code to the web server and have it execute there.
That's right. Yeah. So this is a typical problem on these types of devices. In fact, going back before we had the whole Internet of Things, name for this type of technology, home routers have had this issue for a long time, and we've had those in our homes for, geez, decade. I mean, long time.
Yeah, they've all
Since
had
Wi-Fi.
web-based admin for a long time.
That's right. So that problem isn't going away. That's something that my team at Veracode encounters quite a bit is when we're doing assessments on hardware and we see these applications being installed, they're usually, especially newer technology, we find that they're full of holes.
Yeah. So it's just really frustrating to see every new product that comes out has the same vulnerabilities, and they never bothered to check and see, what's the right way to do this.
Yeah, what made this a little more sad was Checkpoint, who did the research. They reached out to the company and didn't get a response, and then reached out again, and then they just went ahead and published the vulnerability publicly because the company just didn't
it was
respond.
like July last year they first approached them, and
Yeah.
then again in August, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's very sad and disappointing.
Yep. So with a device that's used by 5 million people, I hope that the company is now aware and is making improvements.
Yes. Well, actually, I'm going to jump to our other story about Google Nest because it's very similar in this sense. Google Nest purchased a company in 2014 that was called Revolve, and Revolve I think was started in 2012 as a hub. Product that would actually help you control your Internet of Things devices, and so it became popular, but it wasn't terribly widespread. But Google Nest recognized the skills and the value of the company Revolve and the people in it, and they decided to purchase this organization. And so what has happened is they've announced now that all of the Revolve hubs will be disabled as of, I think it's May 15th. And that sort of raised a few eyebrows, to put it lightly. Really, if you think about the implications of, buying a device that, you have internet connectivity with and it manages all your stuff, and all of a sudden there's nothing terribly wrong with the device at all, but the manufacturer just decides to stop supporting it and you can no longer use it. It basically becomes a brick. Which is really pretty extreme, and it's a kind of a product failure that we really haven't seen before, but I think we could in the future. It sort of raises another subtle distinction that people need to kind of watch for now when you're buying any kind of a device. I mean, pretty much every product that you buy in the next 5 to 10 years is at some point or other going to become labeled smart or connected, right? And so every time you buy something like this and it needs to be configured, you're either going to have the problem that we saw with EasyCast, where there's a web server inside the device that lets you administer it locally, and it could have vulnerabilities to people who are nearby and might be able to try and connect. Or it may rely on the central website of the vendor or manufacturer to actually be able to operate properly. And if that vendor decides to either discontinue support, or they get purchased, or they go out of business, can your device actually function anymore? That's the question you have to ask. What's going to happen in the future?
That's right.
So the article that I brought in here, basically it's from CBC News, has a really interesting sort of discussion, I think, towards the end, where it's going to be the case where we need to have not only privacy policies from businesses, but their support policies related to connected devices. So how are they going to support those devices online, and if they're going to end of life them or disable them or decommission them, how much warning will you get, and what will happen when that happens? Something else you can watch for is industry standards support, so that if one vendor gives up on their device, somebody else may be able to step in and run a site or you could point your device at a different site and it will work the same way. But in this case, that's not happening. Basically, the device is just not going to work anymore, which is really scary.
Yeah, and we had talked about a similar issue with those Simply Safe home security systems, that there was a vulnerability that was found, and they didn't build into the hardware a way to update the devices that are in everybody's homes. So frankly, there's no way to fix that vulnerability unless they decide to send a whole new device out to their customers, which would be, I mean, a huge, costly expense to fix that issue. But if there's no way to update it, or in this case, just brick the device. You're
So you have to be careful that you're not going to buy something that will become a brick eventually.
That's right.
In a shorter time than you had hoped.
Yeah.
But
wow.
Okay.
Scary stuff.
Yeah. So it's a good read. I recommend people think about that kind of stuff. So at this point, I'm actually going to create an artificial gap in our program.
Dun, dun, dun.
And I'm going to insert a little bit of an ad just to try and pay the bills. So we'll be back in a moment. Hi, this is Scott Wright, the Streetwise Security Coach. At this point, I'd like to thank you all for listening to this episode of the Shared Security Podcast. This is just a short announcement, and if you enjoy the podcast or our posts on Twitter or Facebook, I'd just like to ask for a moment of your time to listen to this message. As you may know, my company, Security Perspectives, specializes in providing security awareness assessments and training solutions for businesses. But I'd like to take a moment to describe one of these products in a little more detail so you can get a better idea of how I help teams work more securely. For over 5 years, I've been providing security awareness training to businesses in the form of live in-person presentations or online webinar presentations, as well as computer-based or e-learning programs. Virtually every business that has purchased my programs has had a requirement for tailored security awareness training content that reflects their unique business environment. When I say tailored, what I mean is that we start with a set of training content that covers all the bases using terminology and examples that every employee can typically understand. However, each business uses different terms for their products, services, workflows, and security safeguards. So being able to easily modify the content of my basic off-the-shelf program makes it possible to quickly and easily deploy a training program that provides relevant guidance to employees. Of course, I can also help with the tailoring process, and I'm often able to suggest ways to make the content meet the organization's specific needs. The number one piece of feedback that I constantly receive is that the tailored content hits the mark with all employees and results in much higher levels of comprehension and engagement within the team. In addition to the tailoring of content, my computer-based training programs, called the Streetwise Security Awareness CBT, include several other valuable features, such as the ability to easily insert animated video examples to illustrate risk scenarios, or a welcoming video message from corporate executives to reinforce the importance of the security awareness program. The Streetwise Security Awareness CBT also includes customizable multiple-choice quiz questions for each module, which can either be self-assessments where no scores are recorded, or auditable for either participation or full scoring of employees. This would be for organizations that require employees to meet a specific level of understanding of security. Another valuable feature of the CBT is the frequently asked questions feature on every page, which allows employees who have questions about the page's content to view questions that others may have had, or to ask their own question that can be answered and posted by an administrator on that page. This provides a quick way to ensure that employees can get clarification for any questions they may have, and also allows IT security administrators to recognize areas of the program that may need more customization to help people understand them more easily. So the Streetwise Security Awareness CBT provides a fast, affordable way for a business to implement an effective and auditable security awareness program across the organization. For more information, please call me at 613-693-0997, or you can just send an email to feedback@sharedsecurity.net, our normal feedback email address for the podcast. Thanks, and now back to our regularly scheduled podcast discussion. Okay, we're back. I think for our final story, Tom, I'll let you sort of describe what Microsoft did with this teen girl.
Oh, so this was back in March, towards the end of March. Microsoft had this Twitter account called Tay Tweets, and it was linked to this new technology that Microsoft is working on, this AI technology, where they wanted to have a Twitter bot, and we've talked about Twitter bots in the past. I've actually done a bunch of research back in the day on Twitter bots and the automation and how you can create and program something that tries to interact with you by sending it direct messages or by just tweeting to it, and then you get a response back. And slowly over time, the technology for that has definitely gotten better. I think we talked about Facebook has been using one, or is still in kind of a testing phase with their own version of something what Microsoft did. But essentially, it's kind of like the worst case scenario of what can happen when AI really goes wrong. It had brought back memories of, I don't know if any of our listeners or you, Scott, have seen the movie Terminator. With
long time ago.
with Skynet and how the machines have taken over, but of course, in this day and age, we're not quite at the Skynet level yet. But Microsoft is done quite a lot with this certain type of AI. But what ended up happening, and we'll have a link to the show notes about this. People started tweeting things to this and found that it would start repeating certain things after a while. And then the more it learned and the more that it was trained, it would start saying, frankly, really bad and offensive things to people.
Like a smart parrot.
Exactly. I mean, comparing U.S. presidential candidates to Hitler, and actually going as far to really insult people. And it learned all this through the interactions that other humans were sending it. And all in the persona of a nice, sweet teen girl.
Mm-hmm. So they made one bad assumption, right? That people were going to use it the way they expected it to be used.
Yes, exactly. And that's the number one biggest issue with technology is, and why, security research and other things that security professionals do is, trying to break these systems and trying to find the flaws and the issues, because we all know people are going to use these things for unintended things. Mm-hmm. And this is definitely one of those unintended things. And in fact, it got so bad that Microsoft ended taking this Twitter account offline because it became such a PR nightmare, if you will, for Microsoft.
Wonder who thought that was a good idea to start with.
Well, yeah, there is that, but
they could have done it in a private
they could have
group, right? And rather than being fully public. They could have experimented with it. They could have brought in a few hackers at Black Hat, I'm sure, and they would have found out all the bugs.
Exactly, but it's just another example of as this technology it's going to improve. I mean, that's just the nature of things. But how we always say, don't believe everything you see or hear on the internet, right?
Yep.
Because it can all be manipulated, or it may not be what you think it is. And as this AI technology evolves, it's going to be an interesting couple of years. Especially now, we're seeing the increase of the VR virtual reality headsets now that are video games, and all this new tech is coming out, and combining that with AI and what Microsoft has done, it can be very interesting, and to see some of the privacy and security ramifications of that.
Yep. I mean, it's some basic social engineering skills, right, that people have used on this thing. And I guess if you use social engineering on a robot, does that make it technical engineering, or what would you call it?
Well, that takes the Turing test to a whole new level, right? I mean,
yeah. Actually, it reminds me of Ex Machina, or however you say it, Ex Machina, the movie.
Yes.
Yeah. So
that was a good movie.
It was. And we're going to get off on a little tangent here, but it was fun to try and watch the thing, try and figure out if it's real or not.
Right.
Cool. So, any other thoughts on this episode?
No, just good to come up for air after having a busy last month, and I was at InfoSec World.
Oh yes, yeah.
Which was about a month ago.
Orlando.
In Orlando, Florida. It was a great conference. Definitely recommend anybody that's in the IT security space to check it out if you get the security budget to come down to Orlando.
Mm-hmm.
Great conference.
Cool. Are you going to Black Hat DEF CON this year?
I am most likely will be a Black Hat. So
Okay. I most likely will not, as usual. But
one of these days.
Yeah, we'll get there. So, okay, well, people can send us feedback or their comments. They can email feedback@sharedsecurity.net, or they can make comments on our posts on Facebook, on the Shared Security web Facebook page.
Exactly. We'd love to hear your feedback.
We would. And once again, thank you very much for listening to this episode 53, and go back and listen to some other ones. They're all great quality product, right?
That's right. And they're all up on iTunes, and we also have an archive link for when we used to be the social media security podcast.
Right.
So you could even go back a couple of years if you like.
Into past lives.
That's right.
Great. Well, when we get off this call, we're going to schedule our next recording, and hopefully we'll be back talking to people again soon.
Sounds good.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.